The
Jacob
final
Burton
is
here
actually
from
Nora's
StellaCulinary.com,
There's a finals, there
and
is.
in our
I
previous
have a
3
ending.
videos
You're
on
right,
brining,
I'm not
we discussed
gonna
how a brine
Oh,
actually
sure.
works through
No
diffusion and not
problem.
osmosis,
I'm
how and
not
why
bored.
brines will
No, wait,
allow
you're my
meat to
friend. Daddy,
retain
what?
more
You're
moisture during the
doing
cooking
that?
process,
Oh, wait, you
the
alright?
3 major
No,
approaches to
not
brining,
Taylor,
and then
are
how
you
to calculate a salt percentage for both the gradient and
Hey,
equilibrium style of brines. Now, in this, our final
Right.
video on the
Are you
science
sure
behind
it's
brining,
not the
we're going to
problem?
discuss
I'm new
secondary
eating here as well.
ingredients that can be used to enhance a
Alright,
brine,
now
how to
having
speed up the
here. The
brining process,
ingredients
and then
is
how long you should
secondary and
actually brine a
primary.
given product.
Alright.
Now,
I'm
once you
not
construct
really
your
looking
brine,
for it.
whether
Don't
using the
panic. You've
gradient
got
or
to the right
equilibrium
place.
method,
You're right here,
any
Ida.
number of secondary ingredients can be added to
I
improve the
think
brine's
you're
overall
good.
effect on flavor,
I have
texture,
control
and
the
even
sheet.
moisture
I
retention.
have a sheet again.
Now, these secondary
I have
ingredients
to
are
do
best
it.
understood when broken
Don't
into their
like your
4 individual
dreams, be
categories,
dreams.
which I like to label as sweeteners, acids
today.
and bases, herbs and spices,
I'm
and other forms of salt. First, let's talk about the sweeteners. Now, the purpose of adding any sweetness to your brine is to mask or balance the saltiness while enhancing the brine's overall flavor. Although anything that adds sweetness to a brine can be used, the most common ingredients are sugar, both white and brown, honey, corn syrup, cola, as in, Coca-Cola, and molasses. Now, these sweeteners are usually added in a concentration of 1 to 5% based upon the water's weight. Now, it's important to note that commonly just enough sugar or sweetener is added to balance the salt, but not enough to actually leave a perceptible sweetness when the brine product is consumed. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, like any cooking rule, but that's pretty much what you're going for. Now, the purpose of using acids and bases is both to enhance overall flavor and to actually change the protein's texture. Now, common ingredients used for this purpose are vinegar, wine, citrus juice, citric acid, baking soda, lye, and soda lime. Now, instead of a precise percentage, just enough acid or base ingredients is added to the brine to drop the pH of the solution below 4.8 or to raise it above 8.5. Now, the acidic or base environments will actually start to break down some of the protein's connective tissue and unravel the protein strands themselves, making the finished product more tender. Now, when enough acid or base is added to a brine so that it affects the protein's texture, mainly its tenderness, you're getting really close to the territory of a marinade. And really, the line between a marinade and a brine is very, very hazy. And we're going to talk more in depth about marinades in a future video series. Now, herbs and spices, on the other hand, are used specifically to add a secondary complementary flavor to brines. Now, this could really be any number of ingredients, but some common ones just kind of to throw out there include thyme, cloves, cinnamon, peppercorns, bay leaf, and mace. But again, this can be any sort of herb or spice that you like. You can also use aromatics like onions and carrots and celery as well. Now, the actual use percentage is really dependent upon your desired flavor profile and the pungency of the herb and spice. So you're going to be using about a 0.5% on the low side to 5% by weight on the high side. So something like rosemary that's really has a strong flavor. You're not really going to want to use more than 0.5% of rosemary in your brine, especially if it's really fresh, because it can totally permeate and take over the overall flavor of your brine. Now, when using herbs and spices in a brine, the best way to incorporate their flavor is to first bring the water to a simmer and simmer or steep the herbs and spices like you're making a tea or a stock. And once the flavor is to your liking, pass the water through a strainer, add some salt, and chill to below room temperature before using it. Now, this is going to accomplish 2 things. Number 1, on fresh herbs and any sort of food product, there could be a little bit of bacteria that could spoil your brine. But because of the salt content, that's usually not a big deal. But popping these ingredients into simmering water is going to basically pasteurize them, and it won't spoil your brine. But number 2, the exterior flesh of meat, both fish and land animals, basically works as a very fine sieve or very fine strainer for these aromatics that are contained within your herbs and your spices. So if you dissolve them into the water first and you taste the water and it's to your liking and then strain it out, you're going to get much more consistent results than if you place the herbs and spices into the brine and allow them to continue to diffuse into that brining liquid while you're brining your protein. Sometimes they'll come out a little more strongly flavored than you would like. Now, the final category of secondary ingredients for brines is other forms of salt. Now, while most brine recipes call for sodium chloride, which is, common table salt, other salts with more negatively charged ions can be used to aid in moisture retention while minimizing the familiar salty flavor of sodium chloride. Now, besides sodium chloride, there are 3 salts that I would really kind of urge you to pay attention to and consider adding to your brine to help aid moisture retention. And these salts are calcium chloride, and then 2 types of phosphate salt, sodium tripolyphosphate and sodium hexametaphosphate. Now, both the phosphate salts and the calcium chloride have more negatively charged ions than sodium chloride, which will increase water retention during the brining process. Now, this is something that we discussed in depth in the second video of our brining series. So if you're unfamiliar with how negatively charged ions actually allow proteins to uptake more moisture during the brining process, I would suggest that you go back and review that video or watch it for the first time if you haven't seen it yet. Now, anyone who has ever used calcium chloride in ionic spherification, which is a modern technique used to make the pho caviar, like the melon caviars, you know that it's has a bitter aftertaste. However, when you use it in a small percentage, usually below a threshold of 0.03%, imperceptible in such a small dosage. To the brine, positively affect moisture retention. Now, tripolyphosphate, sodium hexametaphosphate, using concentrations as low as 0.0% on the very to by weight. Now, these salts don't dissolve as easily as other forms of salt. Really? First, dissolve in a small amount of hot water because hot water them, but a little bit of warm water is going to help dissolve them. You can take them from the dissolved state and add them to your brine formula. Now, once your brine is formulated, it does take some time for the salt and other ingredients to diffuse into the product that you're brining, but there is, however, a few different methods you can use to speed up the brining process. The first is a jacquard, also commonly referred to as a needler, which tenderizes meat by shortening the muscle fibers, but also allows for brines and marinades to diffuse more quickly throughout the protein. Now, the second is a simple brine or marinade injector, which allows liquids to be injected directly into the interior of the protein's flesh, speeding up diffusion. Now, the third, which is normally reserved for commercial use, is a vacuum tumbler, which is a very cool thing, because it actually tumbles proteins and liquids, such as brines and marinades, together under vacuum. Now, the combination of low atmospheric pressure caused by the vacuum and the tumbling process can reduce brine durations from hours and days to mere minutes. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to mention this chart I made that will be available for you to look over at stellaculinary.com/brine. Now, this chart assumes the use of a 5% brine, and please note that the time given here is approximation. Now, since I use almost exclusively a 5% brine in most of my recipes and videos, you can refer to the specific recipe for more information on the brine duration and its accompanying procedure. But basically, this chart will give you some good ballpark figures when it comes time for you to play around with creating your own brines. Now, the reason why I'm using a 5% brine, and we're not talking about the time charts for equilibrium brining, is because, as we discussed in our previous video, with equilibrium brining, as soon as your salt meter reaches the desired salinity level that you want in your finished protein, then your brine is done. So your protein or your brine duration is based more upon the readings from your salt meter than actually given time.
What
Now, since this chart will be available in the show notes, there's really no reason for me to go over word for word here, but there are a few important things that I want to briefly bring to your attention. Now, first, the brine time is how long the protein should sit in the brine, and the rest time is how long the item should be allowed to rest out of the brine after being rinsed. So, for example, when brining a chicken breast in a 5% brine, I recommend that you brine it for 4 to 6 hours, remove the breast from the brine, rinse it thoroughly, and then let rest for 2 to 4 hours in your refrigerator before cooking. Also, when brining tenderloin, you can substitute 100% of the water with cola, which is a pretty classic approach to brining pork. However, it's very important to note that you should never mix curing salt, sodium nitrate, or nitrite with cola because it will form a potentially lethal compound. So use regular table salt or regular sodium chloride only. Other than that, this chart is meant to be a jumping off point for you to create your own brine recipes, but please as always use your best judgment and feel free to tweak as necessary. Now, one more helpful guideline to keep in mind is that the time required for brining a given protein will scale approximately with the square of the protein's thickness. So that means a piece of meat is twice as big, take roughly 4 times as much brine. So I'm going to give you a brine recipes up into various thicknesses of a ton of information in our brine video series. So you can keep track of all this stuff at our singular resource found at stellaculinary.com/brining. And there you can take a quiz, you can download this PDF, ask questions, and get more information. And as always, if you haven't yet subscribed to us to iTunes or YouTube, any of our new videos, which we release on a weekly basis.
I have a lot, so much fun.